In the secluded foothills of the majestic Blue Ridge Mountains, where raw wilderness embraces tranquil solitude, lived a compassionate woman named Sarah. She resided in a cozy cabin nestled near a dense, ancient forest. One crisp autumn morning, a magnificent wild bobcat began appearing near her home, its tawny coat a blur against the turning leaves. Recognizing the cautious nature of this elusive creature, Sarah, driven by an overwhelming empathy, quietly started leaving out nourishing food, hoping to offer a lifeline as winter's icy grip tightened. The bobcat's visits grew more frequent, a silent, unspoken acknowledgement, passing between woman and wild beast. But one frigid January morning, after a truly devastating blizzard dumped over 2 feet of snow, everything changed forever. A desperate, heart-wrenching scratching echoed at Sarah's cabin door. Her blood ran cold. On her snow-covered porch, silhouetted against the unforgiving landscape, stood the bobcat. But she wasn't alone. At her furry feet lay a tiny, injured kitten, shivering uncontrollably, and clearly brought deliberately to the human she had learned to cautiously observe. What would you do if a desperate mother bobcat, defying every instinct, arrived at your doorstep to seek human help during a brutal blizzard? This isn't just a story. It's a raw, extraordinary tale of trust, forged in the untamed wilderness, a silent, agonizing plea that shattered the divide between species and a desperate choice that would irrevocably alter lives forever. Before we plunge into this incredible journey, hit that like button and make sure you're subscribed to our channel if you haven't already. Don't forget to ring that notification bell so you won't miss any of our gripping new stories. The morning sun, a rare and welcome visitor, filtered through the towering pines surrounding Sarah Carter's secluded cabin, tucked away in the breathtaking foothills of North Carolina's Blue Ridge Mountains. At 42 years old, Sarah had bravely left behind a wildly successful but soul-crushing career as a corporate attorney in Charlotte. Her lifelong dream to capture the raw, untamed beauty of wildlife through her lens. In just 3 years of her new liberating life, she had already published 2 critically acclaimed books of nature photography and was passionately working on a 3rd, focusing on the incredibly elusive creatures of the Appalachian wilderness. Her beloved grandmother's old cabin, beautifully renovated with modern amenities, while retaining its rustic charm, sat on a sprawling 20 acres of pristine woodland property. The glorious isolation suited Sarah perfectly. Her nearest neighbor was a comfortable 2 miles down a winding dirt road, and the quaint small town of Piney Creek was a scenic 30-minute drive away. Here, surrounded by the symphony of nature, the whisper of wind, the rustle of leaves, rather than the grating blare of honking horns and endless office chatter, she had finally discovered the profound peace she'd been desperately seeking. Sarah's morning ritual remained a sacred, unyielding constant, regardless of the weather or season. She would rise with the sun, brew a potent cup of coffee, and settle onto her wraparound porch, patiently observing the forest awaken around her. Her trusty camera always rested on the small table beside her rocking chair, perpetually ready to capture anything of interest. This cherished ritual had yielded some of her most prized photographs: a cunning fox with her playful kits, a mischievous family of raccoons washing their breakfast in the bubbling stream that meandered through her property, and countless vibrant birds, from brilliant cardinals to majestic red-tailed hawks. It was during one such serene morning in early October, as the mountains exploded with a breathtaking display of autumn colors, that Sarah first spotted the bobcat. The wild cat had appeared at the very edge of the clearing surrounding her cabin, its tawny coat speckled with striking black spots, blending perfectly with the fallen leaves. Sarah had frozen mid-sip, holding her breath, careful not to make any sudden movement that might startle the magnificent creature. Slowly, painstakingly, she had reached for her camera and captured a series of stunning photographs as the bobcat surveyed the area with alert, intelligent eyes, before silently vanishing back into the dense underbrush. The encounter lasted less than a minute, but it had filled Sarah with an indescribable, overwhelming joy. Bobcats were notoriously shy, reclusive creatures rarely glimpsed by humans, despite their relatively common presence in the Appalachian wilderness. To have one venture so incredibly close to her cabin was nothing short of extraordinary. Over the next week, the bobcat appeared 3 more times, always at dawn, always maintaining a cautious, respectful distance from the cabin. Sarah, with her keen observational skills, began to notice intricate patterns in its behavior. How it would emerge from the exact same cluster of rhododendrons, how it would pause to scent the crisp morning air, how its tufted ears would prick at the slightest sound emanating from her cabin. "You're a beautiful girl, aren't you?" Sarah whispered softly after observing the bobcat for nearly 2 weeks. The animal's slightly larger size and the graceful way it moved suggested it was female, possibly a young adult. Through her powerful telephoto lens, Sarah could discern that the cat was lean, perhaps too lean. The approaching winter would undoubtedly be brutally hard for many woodland creatures, but especially for predators if prey became scarce. Making a courageous decision that defied conventional wildlife management wisdom but resonated deeply with her heart. Sarah began leaving out small amounts of food, primarily raw chicken, at the edge of the clearing. She placed it far enough from the cabin to avoid frightening the bobcat, yet close enough that she could observe from her porch. The first few offerings disappeared overnight, likely claimed by opportunistic raccoons or opossums, Sarah suspected. But on the 5th morning, she witnessed a truly unforgettable sight, and the bobcat cautiously approached the small plate, sniffed the chicken tentatively, and then, with lightning speed, quickly consumed it before retreating to the safety of the dark forest. "There you go," Sarah murmured softly, tears pricking her eyes. "Just a little help through the winter." The feeding became an unwavering part of Sarah's daily routine. She was meticulously careful not to provide too much, just enough to supplement the bobcat's natural diet, never to replace it. She researched bobcats extensively and even consulted via email with Dr. Elias Maxwell, a renowned wildlife biologist from the State University, about the ethics and practicalities of her actions. Limited supplemental feeding isn't ideal, but it likely won't create dependency if done correctly. Dr. Maxwell had wisely written back, "Keep it minimal and irregular and absolutely maintain distance at all times for both your safety and the bobcat's continued wild behavior." Sarah followed this advice with unwavering diligence. Sometimes she would leave food, sometimes not. She never ever attempted to approach the bobcat or encourage it to come closer to the cabin. Their relationship, if it could be called that, was one of profound mutual respect and measured distance. As November melted into December and the first soft snowfalls began to blanket the mountains, the bobcat's visits grew more regular, almost predictable. Sarah began to notice subtle heartwarming changes in the wildcat's behavior. Though still cautious, it would linger longer in the clearing, sometimes even sitting serenely in the weak winter sunshine after consuming the food Sarah had left. Once, in an astonishing display of trust, it even remained still. When Sarah stepped onto the porch, simply watching her, with those intense, piercing amber eyes, before unhurriedly retreating into the forest. "I think we're becoming friends," Sarah excitedly told her sister Brenda during their weekly phone call. "Well, not friends exactly, more like peaceful coexisters." Brenda laughed a warm, familiar sound. "Only you would use a word like coexisters, Sarah. Most people get cats or dogs as pets, normal domesticated animals that don't have claws that could disembowel you. She's not a pet, Brenda." Sarah corrected firmly, a hint of steel in her voice. She's a wild animal who sometimes accepts food from me. There's a huge difference. You've named it, haven't you? Brenda teased. No, I haven't named her. That would be crossing a line. But yes, I'm fairly certain it's a female. Sarah paused, contemplating whether to share her latest, most astonishing observation. And I think she might be a mother. A mother? There are baby bobcats out there. Probably just one. I've seen tracks in the snow, a smaller set alongside hers. But I haven't seen the kitten yet. Bobcat mothers are extremely protective, and she wouldn't risk bringing her young near a human. This fact made Sarah respect the bobcat even more. Despite accepting food from a human, the wildcat maintained her natural wariness, especially regarding her precious offspring. It was exactly as it should be. The winter deepened, bringing relentless, heavy snowfalls and temperatures that plummeted well below freezing. Sarah, consumed with worry about how the bobcat and her unseen kitten were faring in the harsh conditions, slightly increased the frequency of her food offerings. She even began leaving the food in a small wooden shelter she constructed at the edge of the clearing. Nothing elaborate, just a simple three-sided structure that offered some crucial protection from the biting elements. January brought a particularly brutal winter storm with snow accumulations of over 2 feet and wind chills that made venturing outdoors treacherous, even deadly. For 3 agonizing days, Sarah remained inside, feeding her wood stove constantly to keep the cabin warm against the howling wind. She worried incessantly about the bobcat and her kitten, desperately hoping they had found adequate shelter in a hollow log or an abandoned burrow. When the storm finally broke and the skies miraculously cleared, Sarah bravely waded through the deep snow to place food in the shelter. To her immense relief, fresh tracks appeared the following morning, indicating the bobcat had survived the storm. But something was undeniably different. The tracks seemed erratic, not the usual direct approach and retreat, and there was only one set of prints. No sign of the smaller tracks that usually accompanied the mothers. "Where's your little one?" Sarah murmured, studying the area through her powerful binoculars from the porch. The question haunted her throughout the day as she edited photographs and corresponded with her publisher about the upcoming book. The answer came the very next morning in a way Sarah could never, in her wildest dreams, have anticipated. She was at her desk responding to emails when a strange, insistent sound from the porch seized her attention. It wasn't the usual gentle symphony of forest noises. Not the cheerful chickadees at the feeder or the soothing whisper of wind through the pines. This was a deliberate, urgent noise, almost like a frantic scratching at the door. Moving cautiously to the window, Sarah peered out and gasped, her heart leaping into her throat. The bobcat was on her porch, something that had never happened before. But what truly shocked her, what sent a jolt of pure disbelief through her veins, was what lay at the wild cat's feet, a small, bedraggled form that Sarah instantly recognized as a bobcat kitten. Its tiny fur was matted with snow and ice, and it lay terribly still. "Oh my God," Sarah whispered, her heart pounding a frantic rhythm against her ribs. The mother bobcat looked directly at her through the window, those piercing amber eyes seeming to communicate a desperate raw plea. Then with a soft, mournful chuff, the wild cat backed away several feet, still watching the cabin intently. Sarah's mind raced a whirlwind of disbelief and profound empathy. This went against everything she knew about wild animal behavior. A mother bobcat should be fiercely protecting her kitten in a secure den, not bringing it to a human dwelling. Something was terribly, horribly wrong. Moving slowly, deliberately, so as not to frighten the mother, Bobcat Sarah opened the door just enough to see the kitten more clearly. It lay motionless except for the shallow, agonizing rise and fall of its small chest, One of its hind legs was twisted at an unnatural angle, and dried blood matted the fur around a visible, gruesome wound. The mother bobcat remained at the edge of the porch, her body tense, ears flattened, clearly uncomfortable with her proximity to the cabin, but utterly unwilling to abandon her injured offspring. "You want me to help?" Sarah realized aloud, tears already beginning to well in her eyes. The bobcat's ears twitched at the sound of her voice, but she didn't retreat. "You're trusting me to help your baby." The full weight of this realization brought a fresh wave of tears to Sarah's eyes. This wild creature, following some unfathomable primal instinct, had brought her injured kitten to the only source of potential help in miles. The human who had been feeding her through the brutal winter months. Sarah's first desperate call was to Dr. Elias Maxwell, the wildlife biologist she'd consulted earlier about feeding the bobcat. "This is unprecedented behavior, Sarah," Dr. Maxwell exclaimed after hearing the astonishing situation. "But if the kitten is injured and the mother has actually brought it to your doorstep, time is absolutely critical. The fact that she's allowing this interaction suggests the kitten's condition is dire. What should I do?" Sarah's voice was a desperate whisper. "The nearest wildlife rehabilitation center is 3 hours away, and the roads are still barely passable after the storm. I can call ahead to prepare them for your arrival, but first we need to safely contain the kitten for transport." Dr. Maxwell paused, his voice grave. "This is the difficult part, Sarah. You'll need to separate the kitten from the mother." Sarah's stomach knotted at the terrifying thought. How do I do that without getting attacked and without traumatizing them both? The mother's behavior is already so unusual that it's hard to predict her reaction, Dr. Maxwell admitted. But if she truly brought the kitten to you for help, there's a chance she'll allow the intervention. Dr. Maxwell provided detailed, urgent instructions on how to safely approach and contain the injured kitten, emphasizing the absolute necessity of protective gear and cautious, deliberate movements. Armed with thick leather gloves, a soft towel, and a pet carrier she kept for transporting injured birds to the wildlife center, Sarah mentally prepared herself for the daunting task ahead. She placed a small amount of food at the far end of the porch, desperately hoping to distract the mother bobcat momentarily. The wild mother watched with intense, unwavering focus as Sarah slowly, cautiously emerged from the cabin, her body language communicating both raw fear and a strange, unyielding determination. When Sarah eased toward the injured kitten, the mother bobcat growled low in her throat, a guttural warning. But she did not charge or attack. Instead, she paced anxiously at the edge of the porch, her gaze alternating between her suffering kitten and the approaching human. "It's okay," Sarah murmured, though she knew the words meant nothing to the wildcat. "I'm going to help your little one, I promise." With trembling hands, Sarah gently wrapped the towel around the small, limp form of the kitten. It offered no resistance, its eyes closed, its breathing shallow and labored. The mother bobcat made a strangled, heartbreaking yowling sound that tore at Sarah's soul. But still she didn't interfere. I know," Sarah said soothingly, hot tears streaming down her face as she carefully lifted the kitten. "I'll take good care of him, I promise." The gender was a guess. She couldn't tell and wouldn't check now, but the word him felt right somehow. Carefully placing the bundled kitten in the pet carrier, Sarah backed toward the cabin door. The mother bobcat followed a few steps, still making distressed sounds, then stopped, seemingly torn between following her kitten and retreating to the safety of the dense forest. "I'll bring him back," Sarah said, fully aware that the promise might be impossible to keep. The kitten's injuries looked agonizingly severe, and even if it survived, it might never be releasable back into the wild. But in that desperate moment, She needed to say the words as much as she imagined the mother bobcat needed to hear them. The 3-hour drive to the Blue Ridge Wildlife Rehabilitation Center was a tense, treacherous ordeal. The main highways had been plowed, but unpredictable ice patches made driving hazardous, and the back roads leading from Sarah's cabin to the interstate were barely navigable. Throughout the grueling journey, she spoke softly to the carrier in the passenger seat, where the kitten remained motionless apart from its shallow breathing. "Stay with me, little one," she urged whenever she glanced over to check on her precious cargo. "Your mama trusted me with you. Don't make me break my promise to her." Dr. Maxwell had indeed called ahead, and a dedicated staff was waiting anxiously when Sarah finally arrived at the Wildlife Center. The small bobcat kitten, confirmed to be male and estimated to be about 5 months old, was immediately whisked away for examination and emergency treatment. He has a compound fracture of the tibia and fibula vertebratum. Dr. Whitaker, the veterinarian, specializing in native wildlife, explained grimly when he emerged from the treatment room 2 hours later. There are also signs of hypothermia and malnutrition, but he's young and, despite everything, fairly strong. Will he survive? Sarah asked, her voice barely above a whisper, fear gripping her heart. Dr. Whitaker nodded cautiously. "I believe so, yes. But his recovery will be lengthy, and there's a significant question about whether he can be released back into the wild after such a serious injury and extended human contact during rehabilitation." Sarah thought of the mother bobcat likely still patrolling near her cabin, agonizingly waiting for her kitten's return. "I promised his mother I'd bring him back." The veterinarian's expression softened with sympathy. "I understand the emotional connection you feel, Ms. Carter, and what you've described. A mother bobcat bringing her injured kitten to a human for help is truly extraordinary. But we have to consider what's best for the kitten's long-term welfare." Sarah nodded, understanding the harsh reality of the situation. "Now what happens now? We'll cast the leg treat for parasites and begin a feeding regimen to address the malnutrition. He'll need to remain here under observation for at least 2 weeks." Dr. Whitaker hesitated. "After that, well, we have several options to discuss depending on how his recovery progresses." That night, in a motel near the Wildlife Center, Sarah called her sister with the full, incredible story. "You're kidding me," Brenda exclaimed when Sarah finished. "A wild bobcat actually brought her baby to your door for help. That's like something out of a Disney movie, not real life." "I know how it sounds," Sarah replied, gazing out the motel window at the star-filled sky so similar to the comforting view from her cabin porch. "But Dr. Maxwell says, while it's extremely rare, there have been documented cases of wild animals seeking human help when in distress. The fact that I'd been feeding her, establishing a pattern of non-threatening interaction, might have created just enough trust for her to take that desperate chance. What happens to the kitten now? And what about the mother?" Brenda asked, her voice laced with concern. Sarah sighed, the weight of responsibility heavy on her shoulders. "The kitten, I've started calling him Milo in my head, will stay at the rehab center until his leg heals. After that, they'll assess whether he can be released back into the wild. And if he can't, then they'll look for a wildlife sanctuary that can provide permanent care." Sarah paused, considering something she'd been thinking about during the long, arduous drive. "Or," Brenda prompted, "or I might apply to provide a home for him." Sarah's voice was firm, resolute. "The center has a program for trained wildlife rehabilitators to house non-releasable native animals. I'd need to take courses, get certified, build proper enclosures, but it's possible." There was a long silence on the other end of the line. "You're serious about this?" Brenda finally said, her tone indicating surprise rather than judgment. "I made a promise, Brenda." Sarah said, her voice brimming with emotion, "to a mother who trusted me with her child when she had nowhere else to turn. I don't take that lightly." Mika. Over the next several weeks, Sarah tirelessly divided her time between her beloved cabin and the wildlife center, making the 3-hour drive every few days to check on Milo's remarkable progress. The tiny kitten was responding incredibly well to treatment, his fractured leg healing properly within its small cast, his weight increasing steadily on the specialized diet provided by the center's dedicated staff. During her visits, Sarah observed the careful protocols the rehabilitation staff followed to minimize human imprinting using specialized feeding equipment that prevented Milo from associating humans directly with food-limiting direct contact and exposing him to natural elements and sounds from his native environment. But despite these meticulous precautions, it became increasingly clear that Milo's young age at the time of injury, combined with the extensive human intervention required for his recovery, was profoundly affecting his developmental trajectory. While he retained many wild instincts, he showed none of the crucial fear response toward humans that would be absolutely necessary for successful reintroduction to the wild. "He's approaching a critical developmental window," Dr. Whitaker explained during Sarah's visit in late February, as they observed Milo cautiously exploring an indoor enclosure, his formerly broken leg now supporting his weight with only a slight limp. "The next few weeks will determine whether rehabilitation for release remains a viable option." Sarah nodded, watching the young bobcat with mixed emotions. Part of her desperately wanted Milo to recover his wild nature fully, to be able to return him to his mother, as promised. Another part, which she was reluctant to acknowledge, even to herself, had grown deeply, irrevocably attached to the spirited kitten with his adorable tufted ears and spotted coat. "And the mother?" she asked, turning to Dr. Whitaker. "She still returns to my cabin most evenings. Sometimes she sits on the porch for hours, as if waiting." The veterinarian's expression was compassionate but realistic. Bobcats are solitary by nature outside of breeding season and kitten rearing. The bond between mother and offspring naturally diminishes as kittens mature. In the wild, they would typically separate completely by 9 to 12 months of age. So even if Milo could be released, he might not reunite with his mother. It's possible they could reconnect, especially if released in his home territory. But it's equally possible they would eventually establish separate territories as they would naturally. This information gave Sarah much to consider as she drove back to her cabin that evening. The emotional narrative she had constructed of reuniting a mother and child might not perfectly align with the biological realities of bobcat behavior. Yet the powerful image of the mother bobcat waiting on her porch, somehow understanding that Sarah had taken her kitten for help, remained etched in her heart. By mid-March, as the mountains began to show the first tentative, hopeful signs of spring, and the Wildlife Center staff made their final difficult assessment of Milo's rehabilitation prospects. "We've consulted with specialists from 3 other facilities," Dr. Maxwell told Sarah during a conference call that included Dr. Whitaker. "The consensus is clear. Milo has developed a level of habituation to humans that makes him unsuitable for release." Even though Sarah had been preparing herself for this outcome, hearing it officially stated sent a wave of profound sadness through her. So, what happens now? There are several wildlife sanctuaries with appropriate facilities for bobcats, Dr. Maxwell began, but Dr. Whitaker gently interrupted. "Or," he said, his voice tinged with a warm smile, "there's your application to the Home Rehabilitation Program, NOMR." Sarah had submitted the paperwork weeks earlier, simultaneously beginning the required coursework and consulting with contractors about building a suitable enclosure on her property. It had seemed like a distant possibility, then a backup plan she desperately hoped wouldn't be necessary. "You've completed the initial certification requirements in record time, Sarah," Dr. Maxwell noted. "Your property is ideally situated with appropriate space and natural features, and your background in environmental law, though not directly related, demonstrates a commitment to wildlife conservation that the review committee found compelling." "Are you saying my application was approved?" Sarah asked, hardly daring to hope, her voice trembling with anticipation. "Conditionally, yes," Dr. Maxwell confirmed. "Subject to completion of the advanced certification course and construction of an enclosure that meets all specifications for permanent bobcat housing." The next 6 weeks passed in a whirlwind of intense activity. Sarah threw herself into completing the certification requirements, absorbing every piece of information about bobcat behavior, nutrition, enrichment needs, and health monitoring. The construction of Milo's enclosure, a spacious natural area incorporating features like trees, rocks, and a small artificial stream, progressed rapidly despite occasional weather delays. Throughout this period, the mother bobcat continued to visit Sarah's cabin, though less frequently as spring advanced and natural prey became more abundant. She no longer approached the porch, but would often appear at the edge of the clearing, watching the cabin with those inscrutable amber eyes before melting back into the increasingly verdant forest. During these visits, Sarah would speak softly to her from the porch. "He's doing well," she would say. "His leg has healed. He's growing strong." The words were meaningless to the wild cat, of course, but they helped Sarah process her complex feelings about the situation. The profound gratitude she felt toward this magnificent creature who had trusted her. The bittersweet sadness that she couldn't fulfill her promise exactly as intended, and the powerful hope that her alternative solution might still honor that sacred trust in some profound way. In late April, with the mountain laurel beginning to bloom and Milo's magnificent enclosure finally complete, Sarah made the journey to the Wildlife Center one last time, not as a visitor, but to bring Milo home. The young bobcat, now nearly 8 months old, and considerably larger than when she had first bundled him into the pet carrier on that snowy January morning, traveled securely in a specialized transport crate in the back of Sarah's SUV. The Wildlife Center staff had meticulously prepared both Sarah and Milo for the transition as thoroughly as possible. But the moment of release into his new enclosure was still incredibly tense. Sarah stood well back as Dr. Whitaker, who had accompanied them to oversee the process, opened the crate door and stepped away. For several long, agonizing minutes, Milo remained inside the crate, only his inquisitive nose visible as he scented his new surroundings. Then, with the cautious deliberation characteristic of his species, he emerged. His movements were fluid, graceful, the former injury evident only in the slightly different coloration of the fur that had grown back over the healed wound. Sarah held her breath as Milo surveyed his new territory, moving gradually from the covered area near the crate to explore the open spaces, climbing structures, and hiding spots incorporated into the design. He showed particular interest in the small stream feature, approaching cautiously to dip one paw in the flowing water before leaping back, then approaching again with more confidence. "He's accepting it, Sarah," Dr. Whitaker said quietly from beside her. "This is a very good sign." Over the next several days, Sarah meticulously observed Milo adjusting to his new home, following the careful protocols established for minimizing further habituation while ensuring all his needs were met. She provided food using the special feeder systems that prevented him from associating her directly with meals, maintained his enrichment items, and monitored his health from a distance, all while continuing her regular photography work and staying attuned to any visits from the mother bobcat. It was nearly a week after Milo's arrival when the mother finally appeared again, Sarah spotted her at dusk, emerging from the rhododendrons at the forest edge, as she had done countless times before. But this evening, instead of lingering at the clearing's boundary, the bobcat moved with purpose toward the specially constructed enclosure at the side of the property. Sarah watched from her porch camera in hand, but completely forgotten as the scene unfolded before her eyes. The mother bobcat approached the enclosure, cautiously circling its perimeter once before stopping at the section nearest the forest. Through the specialized mesh, she and Milo came face to face for the first time in nearly 4 months. What passed between them, Sarah could not say. Both cats remained motionless amber eyes locked on one another in silent, profound communication. After several minutes, the mother bobcat sat down on her haunches, still facing the enclosure. Inside, Milo mirrored the position. Tears welled in Sarah's eyes as she witnessed this reunion. Different from what she had promised that desperate January morning, but perhaps no less meaningful. The mother had brought her injured child to the only help available, and against all odds, the child had survived and thrived. As darkness fell, the mother bobcat finally rose and retreated to the forest edge. But she did not disappear entirely. Instead, she settled in a patch of mountain laurel with a clear view of the enclosure, her form visible in the growing moonlight. The pattern continued in the days and weeks that followed. The mother bobcat would visit regularly, sometimes approaching the enclosure to engage in that silent communion with Milo, sometimes simply observing from a distance. She never approached the cabin directly again, maintaining the cautious distance appropriate to her wild nature. But she seemed to accept, perhaps even approve of the arrangement Sarah had created. By midsummer, as Milo matured into his full adult size and coloration, the mother's visits became less frequent, consistent with the natural separation that would have occurred had they both remained in the wild. But she did not disappear entirely from their lives. Even a year later, trail cameras Sarah had installed would occasionally capture images of the female bobcat patrolling the edge of the property, sometimes pausing near the enclosure before continuing on her solitary way. For Sarah, this ongoing connection was the final profound confirmation that she had in her own unique way kept her promise. She had not returned Milo directly to his mother or to the wild, but she had created a safe, nurturing space where he could live securely while maintaining some tangible connection to his origins. She had honored the immense trust placed in her that snowy January morning when a desperate mother had defied her deepest instincts to seek help from a human. As she compiled her 3rd book of wildlife photography, which would include remarkable images of both Milo and his incredible mother, Sarah, often reflected on the extraordinary chain of events that had brought them all together. Her simple act of leaving food for a hungry bobcat had initiated a relationship that challenged conventional boundaries between wild and tame, between human intervention and natural processes. It wasn't a perfect solution. Nothing involving the complex intersection of human and wild lives ever could be. But in its imperfection, in the beautiful compromises and heartfelt adaptations made by all parties, there was a profound beauty that Sarah captured not just in her photographs, but in her daily life among the mountains, where a wild mother still roamed free, and her son lived safely under the devoted care of the human she had against all odds chosen to trust. In the end, the greatest gift hadn't been Milo himself, though Sarah treasured his presence in her life beyond measure. The true gift had been the sacred trust of a wild creature. A trust that had fundamentally transformed Sarah's understanding of her place in the natural world and deepened her unwavering commitment to protecting the delicate balance between human existence and wildlife conservation in these ancient mountains they all called home. This astonishing story teaches us an invaluable lesson. Compassion knows no boundaries, and trust can forge the most unexpected connections. Sarah's willingness to go against conventional wisdom and listen to her heart combined with the mother bobcat's desperate instinct-defying plea created a bond that saved a life. It reminds us that sometimes the most profound acts of humanity involve extending kindness and understanding to the wild world around us, even when it means embracing extraordinary circumstances. What did you think of this incredible tale? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Don't forget to subscribe for more inspiring stories like this. Video rating 9/10.